Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted Southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. I assume it's a full moon because it's raining outside. It's been nasty all freaking day. There's like 2,000% humidity in the Louisiana night air, so it's freaking fantastic for the hair this evening. There's Ronnie and Lori Owens. Lori just really put you to shame last weekend, Ronnie. Girl power, right, Lori? Awesome. She's laughing her ass off. That's freaking fantastic. Before we get rolling tonight, I found out right before we went on the show, one of our regulars that's always tuning in, Susie Jones from Molino, Florida, was in a wreck this afternoon. Vehicle is totaled. She's banged up pretty bad. Got a broken arm, broken hand, but she is okay. But I just wanted to ask you guys all to send her some positive energy and positive thoughts and prayers and all that stuff. That would be fantastic for her. Susie and Mike Jones are the keepers of the Christine movie car, so they are in our horror family. I see Gavin jumping on board. There's my boy Brandon Vale. Oh my God. Hey, Wayla. Hey, Kim. Glad to see y'all. Brandon, October the 9th, I am writing a show that has been inspired by Brandon Vale. He is staying at a haunted hotel in Victor, Colorado, and he has sent me a shit ton of pictures, and I'm very impressed. Well, I started digging a little bit today, and dude, you're like in ghost mecca right there. Cripple Creek has like a whole ton of haunted joints hanging out around there. So if you need me to, touch base with me after the show. I'll tell you what some of them are. It looks like I'm going to do an entire show just on Victor, Colorado and the Cripple Creek, is that right, area that's around that? Because, oh my God, there's all kind of haunted stuff going on there. I need to visit that joint. I'm telling you guys. There's my boy Freddie, too. He's hanging out with us tonight, another regular. Freddie, I was just talking about Susie Jones, the keeper of the Christine car. She was in a wreck this afternoon. She's okay, beat up, banged up a little bit, broken hand, but send her some positive vibes because she's one of our clan here. Also, before we get the show rolling, got to give my shout outs for the Adrian's Fury Dragster sponsors. That would be Renegade Racing Fuel, D&M Graphics, Surreal Studios, K&N Filters, RJ Racing Equipment, and a whole bunch of other ones that I know I'm forgetting. RacersDirect.com, can't forget them. Serious Cigars. Oh, yes, absolutely. Naked Wines, Freddie. And, of course, this is for Gavin and my girl, Susie. Gavin, I'm doing great. I'll be doing a little bit better in just a second. And tonight's show is sponsored by our friends over at The Lineup. Those are the creepy kids that put the Creepy Crate together for us. Those folks scrounge around all the dusty and cobweb dark corners of the earth looking for all this horror memorabilia for folks just like us. And they cram it all into this little bitty box and they ship it out every other month. And there's always a ton of stuff in there. I don't know how they get so much stuff in these boxes. And we're not paying what the retail value of that stuff is because we don't roll like that. And we also don't roll like that because they love us here at the Twisted Southern Horror Queen Show. And we've got our very own discount code. Check it out at authorlyngibson.com. Right there on the home page, top right-hand corner, there's a link to the Creepy Crates. You can check out some of the past crates, learn a little bit more about it, and you can subscribe to get your own Creepy Crate delivered to your own haunted joint every other month. And then you get $5 off when you subscribe. Make sure you type in the code TWISTED. $5 off your order just because they love all of us little horror freaks over here. Hey, Donnie Reynolds has joined in. That's an old friend of mine from Picayune, Mississippi. Also, got to give just a second of shameless self-promotion for myself. I've been rebranding all of my books under my new publisher's name, which is Batshit Crazy Publishing. The first of my books is from the Vampire series, the Adrian Trilogy. This is Soulmate. Good little read for you, 18 and over only, unless you just don't ever want to have that talk with your teenage child. You will never, ever have to tell them anything. As a matter of fact, they may educate you. Fury is volume 2 of the Adrian trilogy. Badass read right here. Plenty of blood and guts. If you're into vampires and vampire legends, and of course vampire erotica, there is a ton of it here. There's a nice little weekend read for you. Maybe a couple of weekends here for those that are not such avid readers. This is Legacy. It's volume 3 of the Adrian Trilogy series. All available now on Amazon. Need some reviews. If you pick up the book and you love it, make sure to write me a review on Amazon. Also, my attempt at a PG-13 horror book. It's kind of along the lines of Stephen King's Creepshow. There are several little original and unique and gory as hell short stories in here, and most of them are actually inspired by my own personal Channix-induced nightmares. Channix is freaking crazy, so if you're an author and you ever wanted to write horror, get your doctor to write you a script of Channix. I assure you, you'll have some fantastic nightmares. And also, there's a little story behind this one here. Actually, there's a long story, but I'm not going to go into all of that tonight. If you're into an offensive and terrifying horror read that is a fiction based on truth, check out Wicked Truth. It was released earlier this year. It's getting some crazy reviews. Some of them are praying for me. Some of them are praising the book. This particular book was sent out to a local book club and reviewed by those members of that book club. Most of them liked it, but this one came back in a gift bag. No kidding. I'm showing you guys the actual gift bag that it came back in. It didn't come back alone. This lady sent me several prayers to read along with the book. She sent me a prayer book to read because I'm assuming she thought I needed it. She also sent me a crucifix as well as a bottle of holy water. So if you are into that kind of a terrifying read, there is no better advertising or promoting material at all other than this right here. So I keep this handy just so I can tell that little story. You want to be terrified? Read Wicked Truth. Truth's in the pudding, right? Isn't that how that old saying goes? Let's see who else is joining us. Gavin says he loves anything horror. I already knew that about you, Gavin. See, that's why I love you like I do. All right, so we had a couple of questions come in a few weeks back. One of them had to do with werewolves, and the other one actually had to do with Frankenstein. So I had done some segments on both of those topics in the past, so I'm just revisiting those because I've got a whole lot of new followers, and I'm sure not everybody has heard these tales. Some of you may have, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's very intriguing, right? The holy water I'm going to keep handy for the next ghost hunt that I go on, though. I remember the first you showed that off. Yeah, Gavin, you were here when I showed that off. You were like, oh my God, are you serious? Very, very serious. But anyway, I thought we would kick it off tonight with a horridly handsome creature. No, I'm not talking about Big Johnny Blender. I am talking about Frankenstein's monster. Now, I started digging into this just to see if there was some kind of a true legend there that had inspired Mary Shelley to write her fantastic fictional work. And yeah, there actually was a true story that she based Frankenstein's monster off of. So I know you're dying to hear this, so I'm going to jump right in on it, okay? So imagine this. This dude, George Foster, is sitting in what's known as a prison cell in London. It's January 17, 1803. Starting to form a picture in your mind there? Yeah, so we're basically talking about a dank and filthy pit with iron bars for a door and a little bitty hole for a window. It's freezing cold outside, and it's just as cold in that cell. Now, this dude Foster had been arrested, indicted, and found guilty of murdering his wife and his kids. He was sentenced to death, and the gallows were already set up and sitting across the street from him. Now all there's left for this dude to do is sit there and wait. So he's freaking terrified, right? Here's the kicker. Foster was out of town when his family was found dead, but that shit didn't matter. He argued his case, and he even had witnesses that swore he was nowhere around when these murders occurred, but it didn't really do them any good. They had their minds made up, and that's the way the law worked back in the day, right? So here's Foster, an innocent man with a reputation of being a real hard worker and a good father and a good husband, and now he's going to hang for this crime and it's not just that he didn't do it, but he's well aware of what comes after he's hung for this crime. Now, thanks to the Murder Act of 1752, his body was known. He knew that he was going to be anatomized, which is basically dissected, but not before he had hung from the noose for at least an hour. Now, this was a gruesome production that was turned into something like a street fair back in the day. And it was one hell of a deterrent for keeping the criminals in line, or at least giving them some motivation to plan their shit out and not get caught, right? Well, no doubt it probably did help out, but as the legal punishment for this crime wasn't enough, it certainly wasn't all that the sentence murderers had to look forward to. Remember, we're talking back in the early 1800s, and the thought processes and beliefs were very different from ours back in the day, right? So first off, there's this whole spiritual dilemma thing. On Judgment Day, how is a hanged and dissected man going to rise from his grave when his body parts were scattered out to who knows where? Well, secondly was the whole scattered out to who knows where part, right? You see, once the body had been dissected, these droves of medical students from the local schools would start circling like vultures. They'd be snatching and grabbing at whatever pieces, parts they could get their hands on for all their medical experiments and research, right? Well, the remains of the criminal at that point would be taken off to these schools' labs, and typically they were skinned, eviscerated, and then cut into smaller pieces. Then the leftovers were usually burned or just thrown out with the trash. So you see, London at that time had this really dark culture, and these folks were fascinated with things that other societies saw as morbid and gruesome. But it was the elite folks in this society that saw all this madness as avant-garde. And the cream of the crop would show up at these bizarre medical experiments, and they'd be there in their tuxedos and top hats, and the women's came wearing their finest gowns, and just imagine that insanity right there. So sometimes there were some unexpected surprises at these events too. Now, rumor had it that in a few of these experiments that the hanged man would wake up in the middle of being dissected with a room full of people watching. Now remember, it wasn't required by law to dissect the criminals after hanging unless they were guilty of murder. So some of these lucky bastards got to experience being hanged not once, but twice. We here in Louisiana call that lanyard. Now, so back to old George, right? This dude's watching the sunrise. It's his last day on earth. He's shivering cold as he stands up and looks out of the tiny little window of his cell. And the first thing he lays eyes on is the gallows. The hangman's noose is already in place. It's just waiting there patiently for him. So I've got some kind of something coming up. So let me get rid of whatever that is. So it wouldn't be long before the people started lining the streets, because they're going to be eager to sit there and watch him hang for this crime that the poor bastard didn't even commit, right? So George was pretty much familiar with this process because he witnessed it quite a few times himself. And what he didn't know at this point is that he was destined to birth one of the most bizarre and beloved horror tales of all times, right? So from London now to Italy, and long before Foster's trial and sentencing ever took place, this dude named Luigi Galvani, which was a noted doctor and scientist from the University of Bologna, he was sitting in his laboratory dissecting frogs. Well, Luigi discovered that if the amphibian's legs were touched with a charged wire, that they would start twitching. And to him, that proved that in some manner, life was being restored to these frogs. So Luigi's work hadn't really progressed beyond frogs up until the time of his death. But never fear, his nephew, Giovanni Aldini, would pick up his work where he left off. Now, Giovanni is young and he's got a point to prove. This dude had a massive ego. So if Luigi's experiments worked on frogs, why wouldn't they work on larger subjects, right? So these people start flocking to Giovanni's laboratory to watch as he's performing these repulsive experiments on cows and sheep and pigs or whatever he could get his hands on, right? They would sit there and gasp as these animals' eyes rolled back in their sockets and their heads jerked from side to side and their tongues twitched and quivered. Well, his experiments became notorious, and some even considered their attendance quite fashionable back in the day. It was like the dude had his own little cult following. Well, Giovanni's ego wouldn't allow for him to settle for just experimenting on these animals. There were bigger and better subjects out there for his work. So he goes off and he makes a deal with the hangman. Well, soon after that, he finds himself hiding beneath the gallows where he's going to hand-pick his specimens, right? So he would hand-pick whichever body he wanted to take back to his lab and then lug the corpse back to his laboratory where he would immediately begin these gruesome experiments, right? So again, these gore-seeking crowds gathered to watch the bodies twitch and contort during his tests. But Giovanni was intrigued with his results, and he soon began boasting that his experiments could definitely bring life back into a newly deceased corpse. This was a point that couldn't be proven with the body of a criminal, though, because you see, in Italy, once a man had been hanged for an hour, the law stated that he must be decapitated before his body was discarded. So Giovanni's testing had been limited to having subjects that had been drained of all their blood, and of course, they didn't have a head. So he packs up all of his equipment and he moves off to London. And this is where George Foster comes into play. Foster's body was going to be given to Giovanni intact. So Giovanni's reputation had pretty much beat him to London. And he starts making these public appearances, and once he's captured the attention of all these crowds, he announces that he will bring a dead corpse back to life as a result of his experiments. So word starts spreading on the streets, and everybody's planning on being present for this groundbreaking event, right? Okay, so let's get back to Foster at this point. They've come to get him. The cell door screeches as it opens. Foster shivers again as he finishes his last words of his last prayer. Then he's led down this narrow passageway, and his bare feet are sloshing through the filth-stained, icy slush that's covering this stone path. His heart's just freaking pounding, his feet are numb, and he can hardly make it up the steps. Well, finally he arrives at the top step to be greeted by this massive man in a hood, and propped up on the railing behind this big-ass dude is, of course, the hangman's axe, and the handle's all stained with the blood of numerous criminals that had been there before him. So poor Foster steps forward and he hangs his head, and as his senses go numb, the noose is tightened around his neck. There's a loud thud, and then the floor gives way beneath his frozen feet. Below in the gallows waits his transport. When 1 hour is passed, he'll be rushed to the Royal College of Surgeons. So Giovanni's watching on eagerly as his assistants rush toward him with Foster's corpse. He immediately starts attaching these probes and electrons to his arms and his leg and his chest and his forehead. Then he powers up his equipment and he starts running his experiment. Well, immediately Foster's jaw starts quivering and his muscles start contorting, and then his left eye opening. So everybody in this crowd has got to be thinking, this dude is coming back to life right here, right now. We're going to see this shit firsthand, right? Well, Giovanni continues all of his tests, and at one point it actually looked like Foster seemed to inhale sharply, but nothing happened after that. Now this dude is hours into his procedure, and his battery starts to fail, and soon Foster's body falls just as dead and limp as it had been when they drug it in there. So a humiliated Giovanni abandons his experiments, and he returns to Rome, and of course he's blaming his failures on his equipment. Well, all the folks that had been there watching go home, and they start describing all this crazy stuff that they'd seen there. Now, topics like these were pretty common parlor talk back in the day. But, you know, you had the kids to contend with, so they would rush the children off to bed early so they wouldn't overhear all these gruesome things that the adults were discussing, right? Well, one of these dudes that was in the audience that day was a medic named Anthony Carlisle. You're going to love this part, y'all. So Carlisle is invited over for a Sunday social at the home of his friend William Godwin. Godwin's socials weren't just these little small neighborhood gatherings. They were attended by doctors and lawyers and philosophers and scholars and name it. If they were somebody, if they were anybody, they were there. So the kids were all rushed up to bed upstairs and away from these impending and eagerly awaited discussions. So Carlisle starts describing this experiment in a lot of detail while everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat just listening in. Everybody to include at least one of Godwin's daughters, Mary. Now, though Luigi and Giovanni both had failed, Mary Godwin Shelley would succeed, though only in fiction. Frankenstein's character was based on Giovanni Albini, but the monster that Frankenstein brought to life was a creation of Shelley. No doubt her vision of Carlisle's description of the experiments that he witnessed on poor George Foster. So there's a little known backstory on the Frankenstein's monster for you. Now that we've got tall, dark, and hauntingly handsome covered, we're going to move on to another topic, and that's witches, but not before I catch up with my comments here on the side. Crystal Dicker's in the house. Hey, Crystal, good to see you. There's Germ, my boy Germ, hoping to see you this weekend, praying the weather holds out for us. Keep us posted on whatever's going on over there. Marilyn Crumley, good to see you. Hey, Robert, he said he's on the edge of his bed. That's good. Hang tight, dude, because there's more to come. Kevin Schmidt is going, what the heck is this? Is she wearing lingerie? Not tonight, dear. I charge for that. Robert Douglas said, is that George Foster in the back corner? No, but his name actually is George. How about that? Keep an eye on him. Sometimes he does tricks and things. I am an avid vapor, you guys, and I'm going to do this one right here just for me because I'm fixing to grab my glass of Naked Wines. If you guys are interested in trying some Naked Wines, give me a holler. I still have $100 vouchers. I'd be tickled to death to send you the code for that. Check them out. Awesome wines. And I'm loving that one right there. I'm usually just a rosé girl, but that's pretty awesome there. Hi, am I a woman of the night? Define that, because see, I have one of those minds, Kevin, and that could mean a whole lot of different things. Lewis is checking in from Akron, Ohio. Thank you for the invite. Glad to see you, Lewis. Hope you enjoy the stream tonight. Okay, so we're moving on to our next topic, which is witches. Now, I'm going to tell you guys straight up, not a fan of the Blair Witch Project. To me, that was one of the worst so-called horror flicks to hit the big screen. Seriously freaking tragic. Okay, but I will rescue them somewhat. There are at least 3, possibly 4 legends that this bullshit Blair Witch legend was said to have been based on. And I'm going to tell you about those right now. Now, the first of them, some of you guys may have heard of before. It's the Bell Witch legend, which after researching seems a little bit more like a poltergeist event to me, but There's a whole lot of documentation on this legend right here from a whole lot of different sources, so it's pretty cool. Now, John Bell, which was a farmer from North Carolina, he picks up this 320-acre farm in Robertson County, Tennessee. Him and his family moved there in 1804. Now, their first 13 years there were peaceful and prosperous. But trouble started in 1817 after John spotted and shot at some hideous-looking creature he spotted out in his pasture. Well, soon after that, the family started seeing a whole bunch of other weird-looking creatures on the property. The kids were being plagued by night terrors, and they were hearing the sounds of knocking and scratching on the outside of their house, the walls of the outside of their house after nightfall. So it wasn't long after that before all these noises were starting to be heard inside the house. It's pretty typical of poltergeist activity. But let's hang tight because there's more to the story. They were starting to hear other noises inside the house. It sounded like rats gnawing on the bedpost and chains being dragged across their wooden floors and the sound of someone choking. Then after that, they started hearing these voices. And there were whispers at first, but as time went on, these whispers turned into screams. So things were getting worse, and it seemed like John and his daughter Betsy were taking the brunt of the attacks. Now, Betsy was getting slapped around and pinched, and she was getting her hair pulled, but John was often suffering with these fits of choking. And they said that his throat would visibly swell up, and he said it felt like there was a stick jammed in his windpipe. Well, the family had had enough, and they went to the community for help. So the community, or some authorities in the community, opened an investigation. And a lot of the folks that participated in this investigation witnessed firsthand these torments that they were claiming was going on. These folks are actually seeing it and documenting it. So after that, people from miles around were coming to witness the haunting of the Bell Witch, who at this point had gained so much strength that even though she couldn't be seen, she was known to hold conversations with people and even shake a few of those folks' hands. So the Bell Witch was acknowledged, she seemed to have knowledge in a lot of things from the past and the present and sometimes even the future. And when she was in one of her moods, she would answer questions or make predictions for these crowds that would gather all at the same time as she was attacking the Bell family on a daily basis at this point. So after 3 straight years of this endless torments, John Bell was getting weaker and weaker, and finally on December the 20th, 1820, he dies. Well, the Bell Witch decided she was going to take full credit for John's death, and she bid everybody a farewell and left with the promise of returning in 7 years, which she did. Now, she comes back to the home of John Bell Jr., and she has this long conversation with him about the past, the present, and the future. She even made some predictions for his life's outcome. She left again with the promise of returning in 107 years, which would have been 1935. Now, a lot of locals in the area say that she never left. There were continued sightings and sporadic, unexplainable attacks that were going on in the woods that surrounded the Red River, which is where all the Bell family had built all of their homes. Well, if she actually came back 107 years later, I couldn't find anything that documented with any certainty that she showed up. But like I said, a lot of the folks around there think that she never left at all. Now, next up, the second legend that could have possibly inspired the Blair Witch Project is the legend of Moll Dyer. Now, this legend states that Moll lived in Maryland just like the Blair Witch, but according to legend, Dyer had the reputation of being an herbalist, and she had treated and healed a lot of people in the surrounding villages. Well, Dyer kept to herself in a little cottage on the edge of the woods and away from all of the town, so she didn't have to be hassled by society. Now, everybody pretty much knew that she was practicing witchcraft, but nobody hassled her because she had helped so many people and saved so many lives in those communities. Well, that changed in the winter of 1697. The weather that year was freaking brutal, and food became scarce, and to top it all off, this vicious illness ran rampant throughout the villages that surrounded Mal, and it took a lot of lives. So, as human nature does, they had to find an enemy, somebody to blame. So it was suspected at that point that all of these series of unfortunate events was the result of a curse that had been cast down on them by Mal Dyer. So this gang of vigilantes decided that they were going to put it all to an end. So on the coldest night of the year, this mob rides out to Dyer's cottage and sets it on fire. Well, Dyer gets out and she runs for her life out into the woods. And when she thinks she's finally safe from this vicious mob, she kneels down onto a large stone, and with one hand raised to the heavens and the other one beneath her to support her weight, she brings down on the area a curse that was so powerful it drained her of her strength. Dyer then collapsed onto the stone, which where she froze to death and actually froze to the stone. So it was several days later when she was discovered and had to be removed from the stone. There, after they peeled her body off, they found the impression of her knee and her hand in that stone, which was pretty much evidence of the strength that she exerted when she casted her spell. So remember that the Blair Witch legend project, remember, had a rock curse that was attached to it, right? Okay, well, I think this may be where it came from. But anyway, that stone that Mal Dyer died on was moved from the middle of the woods to in front of the local courthouse to serve as a reminder, and it's still there today. So Dyer's imprints are still visible, but they are, of course, worn because many, many years have passed and, you know, erosion and all that kind of stuff. But when people visit it, they say that cameras and EVP detectors and all of those electronic devices tend to malfunction when they're right there in close proximity to this stone. And it's also said that sensitive people, when they're in close proximity to the stone, will become ill. They start feeling bad. Their head starts hurting. Just all kinds of weird pains and illnesses when they come in contact with this stone. But the locals also state that on a cold night, you can still see Mal Dyer hauling ass through the woods right there around town, probably still searching for that vigilante mob, or maybe she's just there renewing that curse. Now, the third of these legends is a kind of a scant tale of three witches of Auckland. Now, I'm saying scant because there's not a whole lot of details that can be found, but what I was able to find was very well documented and came also from several sources. So this is what I was able to verify on this legend. In the 1800s, there were three witches that were hanged in Auckland, and they've haunted this area ever since. Now, there's a statue of three muses in an Auckland park that is near the area where this hanging took place. So these muses are said to actually resemble the witches. However, the locals claim that the statue was intended as a monument to celebrate Auckland's domain's 100th anniversary. But somebody may need to tell the witches that, right? Because that is one of the known areas where they hang out at. So throughout the years, there have been countless reports of park goers being attacked by these cackling hags, and other people have reported having seen these witches jump from tree to tree while screeching and howling loud enough to wake the dead. It's also said that there's one surefire way to encounter these witches. Drive down the lane where they were hanged, then turn off your lights. And it's said that you will see them freed of their nooses and floating around in the treetops. And this legend, too, could have also been an inspiration for the Blair Witch legend. It's the story of Rustin Parr. You're going to love this one. Check this out. So this dude named Rustin was a hermit that lived in the woods just outside of Burkittsville, Maryland, still the same area as the Blair Witch legend. Now, his story starts out with him frequently encountering a woman in a cloak and a hood during his afternoon walks out in the woods. So he'd call out to her and he'd try to approach her, but every time he got anywhere near her, she would just vanish into thin air. So that same winter, he began to hear her voice at night when he was asleep. He thought it was just a dream, right? Well, not long after that, her voice starts to come to him during the day as well. And it's whispering things in different language, and sometimes it would just repeat the same word over and over and over again. So it wasn't long after the voice became a constant with him that it started telling him things to do. Now, sometimes they were just meaningless things like being told to sleep in the cellar for weeks at a time. But regardless of what it was that this voice told him to do, he was powerless to resist. He had to do whatever it was. So, in November of 1940, Rustin was told by the voice to go into Burkittsville and take the first 2 children that he saw. Now, one of these 2 children that was taken was Kyle Brody, who would be the only child to survive. And actually, that's where a lot of this documentation came from. We'll get to that in a minute, though. So Kyle was abducted along with his little friend Emily, and he was made to stand in the corner of the cellar and watch as Rustin carved strange symbols into her face. Well, 2 days later, he cuts Emily open and he removes all of her insides. So Rustin would frequently stop in the middle of his work and he'd look over at Kyle and he'd ask Kyle, "Do you hear this woman's voice?" And Kyle would cry and ask him to stop, and of course tell him no, he wasn't hearing nothing. Well, Rustin would tell him not to cry, that he would soon bring someone else to be his playmate or whatever, at least for a few days. So anyway, all in all, 7 children met the same fate. And when the last of them was murdered, the woman appeared to Rustin, instructing him to complete one last task. She told Rustin to go back into town and admit everything that he'd done. So the police follow Rustin back to his home, and they find Kyle standing on the front porch. And the kid's obviously in some kind of catatonic state at this point. But that wasn't all that they found. In the cellar, there were 7 shallow graves that contained the mutilated remains of these children that he had been instructed to take. So Rustin was arrested and found guilty, and he was hanged in the fall of 1941. Well, poor Kyle spent the remainder of his life in and out of jail or mental institutions. And year after year, Kyle's condition continued to worsen. Well, eventually, the poor kid killed himself by goring his wrists open with a wooden spoon that he had sharpened on the concrete floor of his cell. So later, after gathering Kyle's belongings to be removed from the nut house, they found a notebook. And inside this notebook was writings which were all in the language of witchcraft, which of course is written from right to left. This very same language was found written on the walls of Rustin's cellar. But it would seem that Kyle had picked up the language from Rustin. However, it was a known fact that Rustin could neither read nor write. So there you have it, folks. 4 spectacular legends with serious historical roots to take the place of the bullshit Blair Witch legend. You're welcome. And just remember, if you're hit with the sudden craving for horror, you can always creep over to authorlyngibson.com and check out my blog. You will find legends of vampires, ghosts, and a bunch of other terrifying beasties lurking around there on my site. Okay, let's see what else is going on. I'm having to scroll down to see all my comments. You still have clothes on. Yes, Robert, I have clothes on. I do that frequently. Is Dee's haunted? I'm not sure which Dee's you're talking about. Let's see. Don't get the vapors. No, I won't get the vapors. Not tonight. Freddie has got Naked Wine's link up, so you guys can check that out. Thanks a lot, Freddie. You are my man, my wing man. What about the Wizard of Oz? I don't know about the Wizard of Oz, Kevin. Probably on the wrong stream here. He says he's looking for the Yellow Brick Road. I think Robert and Kevin are doing shrooms tonight. That's freaking cool. Are my parents downstairs? That's funny. Hey, Corey, I'm glad to see you. You used to get night terrors. I get them all the time, but I use them as inspiration to write with. Gavin says her husband and dog is downstairs. Yes, they are. Let's see. Susie, I was talking about you at the beginning of the show. My honey, I'm so worried about you. You're going to be so sore tomorrow. We're all sending you positive vibes, darling. Sore and grateful I am here watching you, and we are all grateful that you are here too. Look at that, Ronnie and Lori Owens, thoughts and prayers for speedy recovery. That was for you, Susie. Look, Freddie also. So see, everybody is loving on you, Susie. We're all going to be thinking about you. Lewis says hauling ass. Absolutely. He says he loves the pretty lady for sure now. Awesome. I'm here every Tuesday night, 7 Central, 8 Eastern time. Make sure you join in. Pain meds, we all understand. Yes, pain meds, Susie, we all need that. There's my boy, Andrew Armstrong. I hadn't seen you in a while, honey. I'm glad to see you popping in tonight. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so far tonight, we have covered Frankenstein's monster and 4 different witch legends. So how about we throw in some werewolves, right? Well, the first legend comes as a request from our friend Glenn Harrison from Hardcore Paranormal. Now, he asked me a while back what I knew about the Rougarou. And I said, dude, that's a Louisiana legend. Of course I know about the Rougarou. Are you kidding me? So I'm going to share this Louisiana werewolf legend right here with you guys. And yes, like I said, he is called the Rougarou. So here you go, Glenn. We are now diving into a Louisiana werewolf legend. Now, this legend varies from community to community out here. Even though we're in Louisiana, there are coonasses as well as rednecks in the area, but it's a pretty cool mix. We all get along pretty well. Really and truly, the only difference is the coonasses wear the white shrimp boots and the rednecks wear the mossy oak ones. Not much of a difference. We all dig the crawfish, right? But like I said, there's a lot of different versions of the story. And there's almost as many versions of the story as there are spellings of the word Rougarou. So you're really not going to spell it wrong. Just put a little Louisiana twist on it, and you got it. Okay, so the legend actually took root in medieval French culture and was born into Louisiana when the first French-Canadian immigrants settled here among us. Now, to the French settlers, this was a tale that they told to keep their children in line and out of the woods, especially at night. But to the locals here who were already well versed in the effects of voodoo, the Rougarou became an even more fierce creature than what these French folks knew. So this beastie was said to stand between 7 and 8 feet tall, and he's got a human body but the head of a wolf. But he's also got these razor sharp teeth and glaring red eyes, right? Now, a lot of folks with this legend will tell you never ever look into the eyes of the Rougarou lest you befall the curse and become one yourself. So, there are several theories on how to become a Rougarou to begin with. First, if you kill a Rougarou, you could become infected with the curse if you're exposed to its blood. Now, to further that belief, if one were to kill a Rougarou and actually witness the beast return to its true form, he shouldn't tell anyone about the encounter for a year and a day, else he will also suffer the same fate. See, things down here in Louisiana got some crazy twists to them, right? Now, the other legends no doubt were put in place by the Catholic Church. They said that if one does not abide by the rules of Lent for 7 years, he will become a Rougarou. And yet another version of the legend said that if a person is turned into a Rougarou, they are cursed for 101 days. and upon the last day of the curse, it's passed to the first victim that the beast drew blood from. So the Rougarou will then permanently return to its human form, and the first victim will turn into a Rougarou at sunset that very night. And the last theory says that one can become cursed by a witch and also be turned into a Rougarou as well. So what do you do if you turn into a Rougarou? I'm glad you asked. Legend states that during the daytime, you of course will maintain your human form. But you will appear kind of sickly. You probably look a little bit like a crack whore. But at night, when the full moon comes up, you'll start lurking around the swamps and the bayous of Louisiana, and sometimes even within the city of New Orleans itself. Now, in these areas, you most certainly would not be the only one out there prowling, but you're likely to be the only one out there searching for human prey. But the Rougarou is said to have an insatiable hunger for blood, and unfortunately, it seems to seek out the ones that it knows in its human form to feed upon. Now, there's some crazy similarities between the Rougarou, vampires, and of course, regular old werewolves, but the three are not the same. The werewolf, of course, has an intolerance for silver. The vampire detests holy relics, garlic, silver, sunlight, and some folks say running water, and there's a few other things I could throw in there, but I'll stop there. And I've only actually found one reference to talismans that are used to ward off the Rougarou. A man would place a leaf inside of his wallet, and a woman would paint a hexagon beneath her bed. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I ain't feeling it. They both sound pretty weak to me, so I think I must try my luck with the silver bullet just in case I ever run up on one of these little beasties. So speaking of that, how does one defend itself against this beast? Looks like to me you're going to have to kill it somehow, right? So silver bullets are out, and the good old stake to the heart approach, yeah, that ain't working either. But thank God these legends are pretty thorough. Cajun legends state that the Rougarou must be decapitated and his body mutilated or burned to keep him dead. So when and where was the last Rougarou spotted? Well, it has been a pretty long time, and there's no photographic evidence is found, of course, in the case of the Honey Island swamp monster, which sometimes is said to be akin to the Rougarou. However, let's not write this beastie off just yet. Since the massive flooding brought on by Hurricane Katrina, there have been reports of something rather large moving around about out in those swamps just beyond the suburbs of New Orleans. Howls and screeching noises can be heard echoing through the bayous at night beneath the Louisiana moon. Perhaps this is a resurgence of the Rougarou, warning the inhabitants of the suburbs to stay the hell out of the swamps, especially at night. Now here's another domestic werewolf legend for you. It was in the mid-1800s that terror gripped the state of Georgia because there was a werewolf running around on the loose. Now, these panic-stricken folks were scampering around for any piece of silver they could get their hands on. They were all about stocking up on those silver bullets, y'all. Now, the legend of the Georgia real-life werewolf has been long forgotten, so we're going to refresh everybody's memory right here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen Show. Now, this legend kind of centered around, or not kind of, it's centered around a young girl named Emily Burt. Now, Emily was a really shy and reserved child from a very wealthy family who were prominent members of a town that is now known as Woodland. When Emily's father died, he left a shit ton of money behind. And rather than spending her days looking after all the kids, Emily's mother ships them all off to this boarding school in Europe so she could spend her newfound free time making the rounds in all the local social circles. What a bitch, right? Well, after her first semester in Europe, Emily goes home. But something was different about her, and the family was noticing it. She looked kind of sickly, and her face was usually frozen in some blank, distant stare. Emily started complaining that she was having trouble sleeping as well. Well, as time went on, her mother becomes aware that Emily had been slipping out of the house at night and was rummaging around out in the forest. But when they confronted Emily, she claimed that she didn't have any idea what her mama was talking about. She didn't know anything about any midnight strolls out in the woods, right? So now everybody in the house is keeping a really close eye on Emily because something crazy is going on, right? So to make matters worse, these weird looking patches of hair start popping up on her in odd places. So her teeth start looking pointed and she's looking like she's growing fangs. Well, Mom's not really wanting to have to deal with all this crazy shit, so she's writing it all off to puberty. But she at least had enough sense to know that she was going to have to start keeping a closer eye on her daughter. So at the same time that Emily is going through this puberty evolution, the local farmers are dealing with some pretty gruesome problems of their own. Talbot County farmers were waking up every freaking morning to find their fields littered with the mangled carcasses of all their livestock. So they're convinced that there's a wolf problem in the area. So all these pissed off farmers teamed up and they concocted a plan to put an end to all these wolf attacks. They organized these nightly hunting parties with the intention of capturing or killing these bloodthirsty wolves. So this goes on for a while, but after a few weeks of all these failed midnight hunting expeditions, the frustrated farmers pay a visit to the town weirdo as a last resort. So the locals were always whispering these rumors about this weird old man from Eastern Europe. Now, some folks claimed that he was dabbling in black magic, and other folks just said he was apeshit crazy. But he had been the only one so far that had offered any kind of explanation. He tried several times to warn these farmers that when these animal mutilations first began, that they weren't dealing with just a regular wolf. But nobody wanted to listen to him. And he was pretty adamant that there was a werewolf on the loose because he had seen this kind of madness back home where he came from. Well, none of them had been successful in finding or killing whatever it was that kept thinning these herds out. And the farmers were tired of dealing with all these dead animals. So they finally decided to listen to what the crazy old bastard had to say. So he starts off by telling them that what they already knew by now, that tracking these beasts on random nights was just pretty much wasted effort. He then advised them all to prepare for the hunt on the very next full moon. In the meanwhile, he instructed the farmers to take every single piece of silver they could find, melt it down, and use it to make bullets. Well, as strange as his advice was, the farmers were pretty much out of options at that point, so they did what they were told to do. Well, a few weeks later, there was a full moon. So all these farmers banded together and they set out for the fields. And it wasn't long after that when the hunting party came across some kind of weird-ass looking creature that was lurking around in the distance, just like the beast that the old man had described and warned them about. It was as big as a man, but it had a long snout, and it was walking upright on two legs. So suddenly these wolf-like ears start twitching, and the creature knew that it was no longer alone out there in the woods. When the werewolf turned to attack this hunting party, every single one of them raised their rifles and took aim and fired. So gunshots boomed through the still night air, and this werewolf shrieked as several bullets pierced its flesh. It turned away and it ran deep into the forest. Well, nobody was really sure where the creature was hit, but it seemed like the crazy old man's plan had worked out pretty good at this point. Well, across the fields from where these farmers were all patting each other on the back and giving high fives, if they did that back in the day, there was another hunt of a different kind going on back at the Burt mansion. The sound of these farmers' gunshots woke Emily's mother up. So she's running around checking on everybody in the house to make sure that everybody's accounted for. Well, they weren't, because Emily's bed was empty and that tramp was nowhere to be found. So her mother didn't know whether to be terrified or to be pissed off. And now she's absolutely determined to get to the bottom of her daughter's secret midnight adventures, right? So she lights this lantern and she heads out into the forest. And she searches around for a while, but she decided she'd gone far enough out into the woods. So she turns around to go back to the house, and she accidentally stumbled upon Emily's unconscious body, which was laying in a pool of blood. Well, it was apparent that she had been shot. And Emily's mother did her best to keep her, to stop the bleeding, and then she ran off to go get help. Well, the following day, the local doctor patched Emily's wounds up, but even he couldn't explain what had happened. After these rumors of Emily's accident and the farmer's successful wolf hunt, the two stories began to collide in the local taverns. And it became pretty apparent that Emily had brought something back with her from her first semester at boarding school, a curse or a disease that was known broadly in Europe as lycanthropy. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's the werewolf disease. So these barroom rumors eventually hit Emily's mother's ears, and she was freaking horrified with the realization that her own daughter had been responsible for this rash of animal mutilations. So she immediately starts searching for a remedy. Well, after a while, she finds out about this doctor in Paris who claimed to specialize in this werewolf disease. Now, needless to say, Emily's ass was immediately sent off to Paris in hopes that she could be cured before anybody figured out that she'd been the culprit behind this bovine bloodbath that had ravaged the entire area. So, according to all the legends, the attacks completely ceased while she was gone. Now, several years later, Emily returns to Georgia. Now, she's supposedly cured of her mysterious ailment, but not long after that, these reports started coming in of mutilated livestock scattered out in the same fields as before, just not quite as frequent and not as severe as they had been in the past. Now, everybody, of course, suspected that it was Emily that was to blame, but she was never publicly accused. Emily lived out the rest of her life as a successful businesswoman and landlord. In 1911, at the age of 70, Emily unexplainably died. When her body was discovered just beyond the grounds of her family estate, her mouth and hands were both bearing stains of blood. Emily was buried in the Owens and Holmes Cemetery in Talbot County. So if you're out there in that neck of the woods, go check out her gravestone. Now, the legend of Georgia's werewolf is still a pretty hot topic among the locals to this day. And some folks have passed down stories from their great-grandparents who personally encountered this beast. Now, skeptics argue that there is a lack of evidence that any of this legend is based in fact, but there is one small detail that both sides do agree on. To this day, there are several reports that the ghostly spirit of Emily Burt still roams around the countryside by the light of the full moon. Pretty freaking awesome legend, huh? Let's see who else has chimed in. If I can, if it'll let me. It may not let me. Oh, there's my girl, Wayla. Yes, a superhuman female. I will be joining as long as I can. Okay, Gavin, I hear you. French Canadian, yes. There are a whole bunch of French Canadian legends up there, Gavin. I need to come spend some time up there. There's my boy, Austin Ladner, also from Picayune, Mississippi. Glad to see you jumping in. What about the syphilis? No, Big Johnny Blender, we are not talking about the syphilis this evening. Gavin says that I think I read a Japanese urban legend about vampires before. Yes, absolutely. There are several Japanese vampire legends. I'll hook you up with one of them one day. Just remind me so I can dig it up for you. Okay, so stories of vampires and werewolves go back pretty freaking far. Of course, vampires go back just a little bit further than the werewolves, but there's plenty of proof that has literally been documented in stone, both carved and painted in walls of many ancient Egyptian burial chambers, or legends and depictions of what we know today to be a werewolf. Now, this next story isn't quite that old, but considering when the legends originated, there's a lot of documentation. Oh my God, how did Hannibal get upstairs? John? This is Hannibal, y'all. My little hellion. So anyway, the year was 1589. The place was a village. John! Look who came to see me upstairs. It's my little monster. It's Mommy's little monster. He'll get a hold of George, and there would really be some madness going on in the corner. There's my baby. Hello, sweet potato. Yeah, he's not having it. He's fixing to tear up the demon over here. Come get him. You're so bad. Anyway, the year was 1589, and the place, a village in Germany named Bedburg. Yes, there were werewolves in Germany. And there goes little Hannibal, everybody, with Big Johnny Blender. Thank you for saving the day. So there were also a whole lot of other creepy creatures, too. This was an era when superstition absolutely ruled the land. And a lot of things that we may consider common today were considered ghastly back in those days, and vice versa, if you ask me. But anyway, back to Bedburg. So for years, the locals had been tormented by something that they described as a demon. Many of them had lost both livestock and children during this time. I cannot believe little Hannibal got all the way up those steps by himself. Anyway, they weren't exactly missing, though. It was apparent that they had all fallen prey to something horrible. One by one, the corpses of this demon's victims turned up. Throats were ripped out and flesh was eaten away from the remnants of their bones. A trail of blood leading into the heavily wooded forest was the only clue to whatever beast they had encountered. So with the entire town on the lookout, some witnesses did come forward. They swore that they had seen this wolf-like beast near the scenes of some of these grisly attacks. Folks became terrified of venturing even outside their homes, to the point of neglecting their daily chores. Well, with more and more of these reports of this bloodthirsty beast popping up everywhere in the area, it wasn't long before these hunting parties started organizing. And one night in 1589, a group of these hunters cornered what they documented as a hairy wolf-like animal. Now, after attempts to stab it with spears and releasing their trained dogs on it, something strange happened. This creature stood up on two legs, and suddenly the hunters recognized the beast as a local named Peter Stubb. Stubb was arrested, and the trial that followed revealed grotesque accounts that ended with the execution of Stubb on Halloween night in 1589. It was learned in the trial that Stubb had been responsible for at least 16 deaths of men, women, and children from the area. He was also charged with rape, murder, cannibalism, and he even confessed to eating the brains of his own son. Stubb confessed to practicing sorcery and witchcraft since he was around the age of 12. He claimed that he had indeed made a pact with the devil, and he'd been given the powers of the wolf. He admitted to stalking and devouring livestock in the area for many, many years. Stubb confessed that Satan had given him a magic belt that when he put it on, it caused him to transform into a wolf. He described how he would chase down young girls who had been in the fields like a swift hound, and upon catching the slowest one, he would devour their flesh, among other things. So Stubb was accused of many more unspeakable crimes and was eventually given one of the most brutal and grisly punishments in history. Most of the information about the event has been well preserved thanks to an ancient pamphlet that describes the crime and trial. In it was written about how the werewolf of Bedburg's skin was torn from his body, his arms and his legs broken, and his head severed. He was eventually burned to ash, but only after a monument was built as a warning to any others that may walk in the shadow of the wolf. His head was then placed on top of it. It's important to mention that the confessions of Peter Stubb took place while this dude was on a torture wheel. So you know he was in some unimaginable pain. Kind of reminds me of the Salem witch trials where the accused would confess to damn near anything during this type of torture, right? Well, the villagers were convinced that his confessions were true. So Peter Stubb was then dubbed the werewolf of Bedburg. Some of the folks believe that Stubb spawned many other werewolf legends as well, but there are those that believe that he could have suffered from the clinical disease just like Emily had lycanthropy. Victims of this mental malfunction actually believe that they are an animal, so they surrender to their most primal instincts. And in some cases, it's been reported that these victims will actually grow excessive hair on their bodies. We all know that the mind has a pretty powerful effect on the body, right? Well, Peter Stubb, was he a victim of mental illness, or was he truly a werewolf as a result of the witchcraft and pacts with the devil thing? Well, we may never know, but the legend of the werewolf will most likely continue to live on in the subconscious spheres of humanity forever. So here's one last werewolf legend for the evening for you guys. I'm actually running over a little bit tonight, so I'll get this one out of the way pretty quick. On December 14th, 1598, a village tailor from Chalons, France, was standing in court where he was facing a ton of various charges. The court finding on this day resulted in wiping his name from all records. Even though his name had been long since forgotten, his nightmarish acts have lived on even up until this day. It was said that at his shop in Paris, he would lure children in where he would then imprison them and torment them both sexually and physically before slicing open their throats. And some accounts state that necrophilia was also a part of his routine. Well, later on in his madness, the tailor tried his hand at being a butcher. So he'd lay out the corpses of his young victims and carve them up like roast beef. But later on, he'd eat them for dinner. So I know so far it sounds like this dude was just a cannibal or maybe some sicko, psycho serial killer, but with some pedophilia issues. But the legend says there had been reports of him prowling around in the woods at night in the form of a wolf. In the meanwhile, there's dozens of kids missing, and it wasn't long before this tailor became a suspect. Well, one night while he was allegedly out doing his wolf thing, his shop was searched. And some of the things that were discovered during that search were so gruesome that they weren't even recorded in writing. Those details were delivered to the authorities in whispers. Among those horrific things were barrels filled with the bleached bones of children. The tailor was taken into custody and was tortured until he confessed to his horrid deeds. He admitted to having slaughtered up to 48 victims. Most of them were young children. All right, folks, I'm glad you guys all joined in tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stream. If there are any urban legends or haunted history in your neck of the woods or somewhere else that you've heard about, just like Gavin talking about Japanese vampires, which I'll definitely hook you guys up with at some point, make sure to let me know. Shoot me a message on the Southern Horror Queen fan page. I'd love to do some research for you. In the meanwhile, check out authorlynnGibson.com where there's a link there to the Creepy Crate, links to all of my books, pictures from past events, and all kind of crazy stuff. If you go all the way to the far tab on the right, you'll find The Edge Radio US. There is a link there to stream some of the most badass rock music on the air today. Also, a link where you can download your very own app for free to your Android device, whether it be phone, tablet, or whatever. All right, folks, thank you again for joining in, and I hope to see you guys next week at 7 Central, 8 Eastern. Remember, if you are in the Amory, Mississippi area, come hang out with us, Big Johnny Blender, the Adrian's Fury Dragster, the guys from Kill Pop Culture, and, of course, the guys from Kill J. We'll all be chilling out there. The flyer's on my page, so check that out. Come by, meet us, shake our hands, come have a beer, or whatever the case may be. We'd love to see you. All right, folks, until next week, y'all keep it creepy, because you know I will.